Okay, so we're going to go in the Lightroom and we're going to change from the library mode. So I picked my folder that I have my images in, and I'm going to go into the development mode. I've selected the one shot I want to edit. So we're going to hit develop. Now everything over on the right side is going to change. Some of the things on the left side changes. Now we've got a history of everything, any edits that we've done. We've got a snapshot if you wanted to hold anything at one point. I've got my presets. We're going to talk about that in a bit. But let's look at some basic details here. So on the side panels, if I close them all up, we've got all these standard panels, which are actually very similar to what you'd find on Adobe Camera Raw. So under the basic panel, we're going to do some of the basic adjustments. So taking a look at this shot out of the camera, it was actually quite underexposed. Light kind of stunk, and that's kind of what we got. It was changing fast, and I was standing on a really weird rock, so I had a tough time looking right down my camera. So we're going to bump that up, get it up to where it probably should be, get those whites to be exposed properly. Up here in the histogram, this is what's great, is as we go from the exposure module here, when we move our exposure, you can see there's that light gray area up here. From here to here, this is where the exposure is going to do most of the adjustments on the photograph for editing. And I find this to be a great system, or a great way to learn to how to read your histogram. You know, you're going to look at it and say, okay, I got to make this, move this around. Here's my whites, of course, and that takes us down to the next thing, the recovery. Recovery is the brights. So this is a neat tool. If we had some highlight warnings, right now we don't. Here's the warning for the highlights. Here's the warning for the shadows being over or underexposed. So let's expose this shot to say that we really kind of screwed it up on the brights. Let's take a look at our warning. That red that you see right there is our highlight warning. And if you were looking at that picture as it's exposed right now on your camera, it'd probably be a blinky. So to remove that blinky, we can either adjust the exposure, or if we like the rest of the tonality in the picture, we could go to recovery and move that very right side of the histogram away from the edge. Come up here, we've got no warning. Now we got a lot of brights. Doing this process does add a little bit of noise. It's best to get the right exposure right up front, get everything balanced. Good way to go. The one I do use quite often is recovery. Recovery, as you can tell, the shadow is right up here in this area. This is in the area of your histogram where there's shadows. So we've got some shadows over here. We've got some shadows in the rock. If I move that up, you should see that the shadows disappear, but it also sort of fades out everything else. This is one you want to be subtle with. You want to move it just enough, because what you're really doing, you're squishing your histogram and reducing contrast. Contrast really is about moving your histogram apart. So check this out. We come down here to the contrast thing. As we move it to the right, watch our histogram. It's going to spread out. More contrast. And we reduce the contrast. We're going to go more towards the center. So we want to keep that in mind. Any adjustment that reduces the contrast, that shrinks our histogram towards the middle, is going to reduce our contrast. So with fill light, I do it just a little bit. Now in Lightroom, the blacks are often going to be set at a preset of 5. On some of the pictures, that's fine, but when I get my exposure right on, I often find this is way too high. I often take this down. In this shot, since it was a bit underexposed, you know, I've got some room over here in the black side to stretch out that histogram just a bit more, add a little bit of punch. But I could do that down here in the next panel if we come down to the contrast or the tone curve panel. So I can come down here. This is where I usually start next. I want to get my tones correct first, and then I can work on improving the other details. So over here, we've got a tone curve. Anytime you're in Lightroom and you see one of these arrows that takes you up down, that means you have options. If you click it, you can go to a linear contrast line, which is basically going to be a straight line, and then you can go from there. I find that medium contrast is pretty good. It's a very shallow S curve, reverse S. And what I have done is I set up a preset over here. Presets are really handy. I find I do almost the same exact thing on most images. So I've got a medium contrast preset. It adds +4 on the lights, -7 on the darks. And then the highlights and the shadows I adjust based off of the picture. Highlights here, I want to pump up just a little bit more. Shadows, I don't think I'm going to touch too much. So there we go. I've got a shot that I like the contrast on. As you can see, got a lot of spread across the histogram. So good stuff. Let's go back up to the regular basic panel here. We've got the next step is white balance. So when I click it, we have a white balance dropper, and underneath the histogram you're going to see an RGB scale. What's great about this is we can go find RGB values in a gray portion of the rock and find something that's kind of close, click it, and we're white balanced. So not a bad option. You can also go in, that's custom white balance. We can also just take anything. We can go just to daylight, take any of the color temperatures of cloudy. I find it as using the custom gives me a lot more control, gets me exactly what I want. One other neat feature right up here in the basic panel is if you want to turn the shot black and white, bam, black and white. Everything else in the controls down, especially in the saturation, does change a little bit, but overall on your basic panel, you want to shoot black and white, well, shoot it in color, realize that maybe it's black and white better. You do have a temperature adjustment here, handy for adjusting. If we come down here, we got your standard contrast and brightness. A lot of people are familiar with that. Presence down here, clarity is going to bump the middle contrast at edges. So if we go way in here, let's pick a nice spot where there is some contrast. We got black and white. We're going to take this way down. You can see that it's really not popping. So bring it up, it really starts to pop. And it does, you can see it. It's changing the leaves, it's changing everything. So you want to be subtle about it. I want to be just to the point where it's nice. So if we back up, when we're in the navigator over here, we can hit fit, take it back, or you can just click the image. See, we got a plus zoom. Click it once again, takes you back. Pretty cool feature. Saturation expands your histogram and expands the colors. Vibrance sort of pumps up the areas at the middle and stretches it at the bottom side. At the edges of your histogram, you'll see they'll go down. In the middle, they'll slowly rise just a little bit, and then they all start to come down as they reach on the outside of the histogram. This are two settings that you want to be kind of subtle with. You can go too far. I have a preset for a mild presence and then a strong presence. I'll bump that up to nice clarity there. So that takes us through some of the basic editing. Next video we're going to talk about the rest of this stuff down here, especially the detail vignettes and the HSL panel. So I'll see you then.